Hi, everyone. Your instructor here, Maryssa, and I am teaching one of the SPED 675 sections for the families class, which also goes with our SPED 779 graduate level class. And I am here today with my friend, Christina Edwards, and we are going to talk to you a little bit about working with families who has a young child or a family member with a disability. And so we're just really gracious and grateful that Christina is here today and to kind of talk to us a little bit about her family. So, Christina, do you want to? I kind of introduced you a little bit, but
Great.
is there anything else you want to say before we kind of get started?
Absolutely. So probably most helpful is to figure out why you asked me. So I am the oldest of three children. I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey with my family, and I think the reason why I'm relevant is because my younger brother was diagnosed with autism when he was younger. And he is currently 27 years old. So we have 27 years of experience, and I think the conversation we're about to have is the perspective from a sibling's point of view. The other thing I'll mention that I think is semi-interesting is that my mom's youngest brother was also diagnosed with autism. And he is about 57 years old now, I think, at the moment. So an interesting part of our family unit is that my mom grew up with autism being such a prevalent part of her life, and then now has a son that also has autism. And the way her brother and my brother have gotten training and treatment and just services is really drastically different. So that's an interesting aspect that sort of I'm sure we'll cover in conversation. And I guess the other thing I should note is that my middle sister, so it's myself, my sister, then my brother. My middle sister actually is a teacher for special ed students and with a focus on autism, and teaches at the school that my brother has attended since he was about 4, really 3. So there's a lot of autism focus and different levels of interest in education and that I've seen and can kind of speak to, hopefully, of interest.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Christina, for giving us a little bit more background. And again, just really appreciate you taking the time to be here. So, why don't we kind of start, I guess, from the beginning, sort of, as a family. I know you were very young when Philip was born, but sort of as a family, what did you ever hear your parents share, what the concerns were, sort of that like early intervention or sort of diagnosis, like what did that look like?
Absolutely. So my brother, his name's Philip. He is the youngest, and we're all about 3 years apart. So I was 6 when my brother was born, and my sister was 3. So around the time my brother was about a year and a half, my mom said she just noticed that he was not doing the same things developmentally as we were. If you went to the grocery store and you walked up and down the aisles, and we got to the end and realized we had forgotten something and had to go back to the first aisle, it completely threw him for a loop, and he would have a temper tantrum. My mom was like, I don't understand why this is an issue. There were other things where for a minute my mom actually thought that he might be deaf because he wasn't responding to any type of verbal cues or communication or directives. Wasn't really engaging with anyone in the family. However, he could be upstairs in his room playing, and Barney would come on the TV, and he would run downstairs and be in the family room in an instant. So my mom was like, he doesn't have a hearing problem because he can hear the Barney theme song,
Yeah.
from upstairs in his room with other distractions. So as she, and like I said, her younger brother had autism, so she kind of had this on the brain that she was a little bit aware and educated on the disability. So when my brother was about a year and a half, she said that they went to the doctor and they tried to get him evaluated to talk to the doctor and see what was happening. And the doctor was like, no, he's a boy. He's a boy. Don't compare him to the girls. Just give it some time. He's probably just gonna, pick up speed in a little bit. Well, my mom pushed and pushed, and actually both my parents kind of pushed and pushed. I think my mom was the main one. Um, and eventually they did get him diagnosed, and the doctor they were speaking to said they diagnosed him with PDD, pervasive developmental delay, I think is the term for it. And the interesting thing that my mom kind of talks about in her stories is that she said straightly to the doctor, my gosh, I'm so glad, I'm so relieved that it's not autism. And the doctor never said anything about that. So then my parents left and went home, and they looked it up online, and it said that PDD was what's the word I'm looking for? Aversion? That's not the right word, but a version
It's on the
of
spectrum.
autism.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. So basically my mom was very upset about it. I think because she saw my uncle pretty much get institutionalized growing up, and has very limited language skills and very limited skills in general. And I think my mom immediately thought that that was sort of the path for my brother. Thankfully, as many developments have come across, with my brother being born, 40 years later, a lot has changed with resources and education. And so we were able to get him into a program almost immediately where he spent 4 hours a week one-on-one with someone, where they were working on like behavior, they were working on sign language, working on speech, various different things. And then so he did that from about the age of 2 to 3. And then when he was 3, for another year, they went to he got put into a different program where there were, I think, 5 students and 2 teachers. And the classroom he actually was put into was the school's first autism only classroom. So previous to that, if you had gone to the school, you might have been in a classroom with other disabilities. But he was in a class that was just strictly autism. So he did that for about a year, and then he got placed into the school that he has since been a part of, and the program he's since been a part of in Princeton, called Princeton Child Development Institute. And he was there from about the age of 3. He was almost 4 when he joined the school, and then they kept him in the education program from then until 21. And then PCDI also has an adult program where he's gotten jobs, and hopefully one day they will be managing a group home that he will be transitioned into. I think I talked a lot more than what your question was, but
No, that's totally fine.
Was relevant.
No, that's really useful. You mentioned a lot of different things. You talked about like the diagnosis. And so I'll give some more information to students about PDD at a later date and sort of what that looks like. But I think that's all really useful. And I think even just the context about like your uncle and like your mom's perspective and how that, a lot has happened in the last 40 years. And hopefully, we'll continue to make more progress. So yeah, I think, and I know Philip, and I know the students don't necessarily know Philip, but can you talk a little bit about what it was like having Philip as your brother, and sort of maybe how the relationship was different than you and your sister, boys versus girls, or just, ability versus disability, what that looked like,
Definitely.
Yeah.
So Philip is so super social.
Yeah.
He does not know a stranger, and we joke that he has this amazing memory. He is our date keeper. He is our memory. So we've always heard that sometimes, so it was interesting when my mom was trying to explain to us when we were little about autism and Philip, and when our friends would come over and try and explain to what was happening, because much like, or I guess the opposite of Down syndrome, like when you've got someone in the family that has Down syndrome or a disability that's physical, that has a physical component to it, it's easily identifiable that there's something that's different. With Philip, he looks quote unquote normal. Um, but his behavior and his interactions are very different. So he was able to learn how to talk and doesn't really shut up ever, which we love, but sometimes we joke that he learned to talk too much. Um, and so the biggest things that we struggled with was his behavior. So my mom would explain it in the sense that his brain was very much like a tree, where he had all the branches and he had the trunk, but not all the branches were connected to the tree. And some branches were really, really a lot stronger and a lot longer than the other branches. So like his concept of safety, of like, because he's so social and he loves talking to people, if a stranger were to come to the front door, he would have no question, no reason not to open the door and talk to that person. He also has no concept of money. He has no idea if a $20 bill is more or less than a penny, and math does not come easy to him. And then a lot of like the core subjects of science, et cetera, et cetera. But what he does really well in is this like memorization. And it's not even memorization. He just will meet someone and we don't know if he has a photographic memory. We want to figure out a way to like use this information for him. But he's so social and he just remembers everything. He's also such a lovable guy. But so my friends were always so wonderful with my sister's friends too, where they kind of just accepted him as a little brother and he was always kind of around. So when he was younger and he would throw a tantrum or do something, people would kind of be like, oh, well, he's just kind of a baby, or he's a toddler, or he's little, and it wasn't that weird. I think the part where I personally got very embarrassed, and I hate to use the word ashamed, but like ashamed to have him around, was probably when I was in high school and if he was 6 years younger, you know, theoretically like middle school, early, late elementary school years. But that's when I feel like his behaviors, he hadn't learned how to control them yet. And they were outbursts and things that you would expect of a 2-year-old, but you would not expect out of a 12-year-old. And they were things where like an air horn and loud noises were really disturbing to him. I was a cheerleader growing up and I was a I cheered for basketball. And as many of you know, if you've ever been to a basketball game, they use an air horn a lot to signal timeout, stop, going, quarters, etc. And the air horn would just completely throw him for a loop. My mom was very insistent that we were not going to operate as like Philip and the rest of the family, that we were going to be a unit and we were going to do everything together or we weren't going to do things. So if she was going to come watch me cheer, then Philip was going to come watch me cheer as well. So that was one thing that I always got embarrassed about, because whenever they did the alarm at the first couple of basketball games, which sometimes you never even know what will set him off until you're in that situation. So the first time, I mean, it set him off and he had like a full-on temper tantrum in the stands. After that, thankfully, the school that my brother got into, the resources and the way the program is structured, it's one-on-one, which is very, very rare. And we are completely grateful to have that sort of resource available. But part of the schooling also was someone would come out and help us with different behavioral issues outside of school. So a teacher would start coming to the basketball games and kind of teach Philip how to sit and listen to the basketball games and, you know, act appropriately. So that's just one example of sort of the many examples of times where you wouldn't know what was going to knock him, you know, send him for a loop. And then we kind of had to work on the behavior. I mean, now that he's gotten older, he's learned these behaviors and he kind of knows what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And we've also, as a family, learned how to manage these things a little bit better. It's interesting you ask about the relationship between me and my sister. I feel like I've almost taken, and I don't know if I remember feeling this way to my brother when I was little, but I definitely feel this way now, that there's more of like a mothering aspect that I take for my brother as opposed to my sister. In my mind, my brother will always be like a 5-year-old little boy. Sometimes it's funny when people who don't know him refer to him as like a man, because I'm like, who are you talking about? And I'm like, no, I have a 6'3" brother who's 27 and shaves and is a man from an all physical aspect, but
Yeah.
mentally he's definitely not at 27, and in my mind he's not a 27-year-old. So yeah.
Yeah. Great. That's a lot of information. But it's all useful, or, good information.
Okay.
Sorry, no, awkward.
No, I know. I'm like trying. I guess your student should probably know that I just talk and talk and talk and talk. If it's
Christina
not
likes to
already
talk. So maybe
obvious.
Philip learned it from you. Maybe he learned
It
how
could
to be
be.
chatty from you.
It could be. All right. I'll try and be more succinct with my answers so we
No,
can
no, not at
bring
all.
it
It's all,
back
I
and
think
make
it's just,
you
it goes with
pointed.
the flow. So it humanizes us a little bit too, right?
Great.
So we're not
Yeah.
just people on the screen. Can you talk like a little bit about, and I do eventually want to kind of come to COVID and
Mm,
Philip. But
yeah.
before that, you talked a little bit about, Philip going to school until he was 21, and then sort of the post-education program for, like, training for work and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, that transition, or how things were for Philip before he was getting ready to officially graduate?
Yep, definitely. So, Philip's also really big at like milestones. So when he saw my sister and I have like sweet 16s and different birthdays and go to prom and get yearbooks and graduate, we never really thought those were things that he would want to do. But as he got older, he kind of started asking, when's my prom and when's my graduation and when's my X, Y, and Z. So he became very aware that his milestones, he wasn't getting the same milestones we were getting. Um, and I don't know at what point, but at some point we did try and mainstream him from PCDI into the classroom, mainly because the school district, so the way PCDI is set up, it's a private school, but the school district in New Jersey does give funding to PCDI. So like we're from West Windsor, so like the West Windsor School District pays PCDI to help with Philip. However it is. I don't exactly
Yeah.
know all those details, but at some point, West Windsor had a very well developed special education program. And I think they were putting a lot of resources into autism specific. And so they were really pushing to mainstream Philip into the West Windsor school districts from like a monetary standpoint. So they would no longer have to pay PCDI for the services because they felt like they could provide them themselves.
Yeah.
So my parents were very hesitant because I feel like it might have been when my brother would have been in like second grade. So it wasn't kindergarten where you're kind of learning the things that my brother actually knows. But by the time you're in second grade, you're actually learning real conceptual sessions and lessons and things of the sort. So, and my brother just he didn't wrap his head around that. So they tried to mainstream him, and the lawyer basically said, we have to go through the process and unfortunately have him fail in order for the school district to say, okay, we don't actually see this working out and being a success.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through that. And the reason why I mentioned that is because I feel like when he came back from that position, the focus at PCDI was less about teaching him history, and it was more about teaching him basic skills like how to appropriately take a shower, how to cook meals, how to make your bed, how to do laundry, life skills more or less than actual education. And the way, at least in New Jersey, I don't know if this is how it is all over the country, but in New Jersey, the school district still supports the child with special needs until the end of the school year in which they turn 21. So that's why Philip stayed in the education program until he was 21, because that's when he aged out. So at those last final years, he was no longer kind of with the education program is what they call it. And he had kind of transitioned into the adult program. For him, it was really exciting. He was doing things like going to the gym and working out and learning how to cook. And there was partnerships with a local community college where they would kind of, the students or the adults and the teachers would go. And so he did like a cooking class and he was participating in plays. So there was a lot of engagement, a lot of different stimulus and things that he participated in. And then when he transitioned into the adult program, I think because he was already really working with those teachers and kind of in that part of the school, and it was the same school that he went to, there wasn't really a hard transition period. We did have a bit of a transition period when he got a job, but I think in some ways he was almost bored at school. So it was exciting for him to get to go out into the community, have a job. His job was at an office, in a corporate office. So he had to get dressed up, and they had like a break room, and you had to bring your lunch and like, you know, wear not a tie, but like you had to wear a button up shirt.
It was like his
And
khaki
I
pants
almost,
phase.
his khaki pants. Yep.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
and, you know, I feel like it almost gave him like a new sense of purpose, which
Mhm.
we were excited about because we were like, a job will give him a sense of purpose, but we didn't know how much it would resonate with him. But he actually, I think, really, really enjoyed it and loved when he had to go to Pace and get dressed up. And he would go 3 days a week. So Monday and Friday, he'd still be at PCDI. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, he would go to his job, and we was making a paycheck and had his wallet and had his coworkers. And it was also really fun because we'd go into the community and we would see his coworkers. I say we go into the community. That's what they call it at PCDI.
Okay.
I realize that actually sounds weird to like people that don't speak our language,
They
but like we'd be in
specialize. Yeah.
Costco
Yeah.
and we'd be in the community. My mom's
Yeah.
like, that is such a weird saying to
Yeah.
people that don't know it. But anyway,
Yeah.
we go to Costco or the grocery store, out to dinner, and he would see one of his coworkers and he would have a really appropriate interaction with them. So that was also really nice for us as a family to see him kind of, you know, be a part of society.
Yeah.
Um, which was cool. And he's had 2 jobs since then.
Yeah.
His second job now is like, oh, he works for L'Oreal, or worked.
Oh, nice.
Now
Okay.
COVID, we'll talk about COVID, but
Yeah.
doing like on like the assembly line, like putting together lipsticks and different things. So it's very different work, but it seems to him it's still like rewarding. So
Yeah. And I think all of us really would just like want a sense of purpose like every single
mhm,
day. And if you don't have that, you kind of lose yourself a little bit. So it's good that Philip was
exactly.
finding that. So now like kind of transitioning to COVID, what is he doing now? I know you were
Yeah.
home a lot more often. So kind of getting
Yes,
roped back into family functions and roles, and what did that all look like?
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So COVID is interesting. So at home for a while was just my parents and my brother, and my dad travels a lot for work. So majority of the time it was just my mom and my brother, and they kind of had their own routine.
Mhm.
Not very structured, very heavy on electronics for my brother, and just kind of letting him do his own thing. So when COVID happened, um, they closed down the Department of DDD. I
Department of
wish I knew
Developmental
what it's
Disabilities?
called.
I
It
don't know what
might
DDD
be
is.
that,
Okay.
yes. So it's the state organization that runs all the adult programs for
Okay.
special education in New
Might be
Jersey.
different. Yeah. Okay.
But so it might be what you said. I only know it
I
as the
don't know.
shorthand.
That was just a guess, but
It might be.
okay.
So they basically shut down the adult programs,
Yeah.
which meant there were no longer teachers who could go to L'Oreal with the students to help them fulfill their jobs.
Okay.
And then PCDI closed its doors as a school and kind of focused on going remote and virtual learning, but their focus was really on the education department and not on the adults, because the government kind of regulates and mandates that, and there was not a lot of regulation on that. So then Philip was home without a job. So mom was home during the day, Philip was home during the day. I left, I was living in New York City. I left New York and came home And my dad stopped traveling, but for like 2 weeks, we were going to his office that we could drive to. So it was a little bit of a staggered transition where Philip came home. He was no longer working. It was just him and mom all day. Dad and I were still out of the house. We come home for dinner and sleep. But then eventually we had to stop going to the office. So then it was all four of us. And my dad and I were trying to figure out how to like work from home. So it was really interesting. And I will actually think and it might be because I was so young, and maybe when Philip was going through his real like through puberty and transitions and or like harder transitions in different stages of life. I was in high school and checked out, and I was in college and away, or I was in New York and maybe not aware of it. But at the beginning of COVID, it was really difficult for Philip. And I think it's because he didn't have an end date. He didn't have a schedule. He didn't have a routine. He didn't know what was happening. He very quickly understood that things were closed because there was a bad virus and people were sick. So he understood the concept that like he couldn't go out. And he, we weren't going to the movies. We weren't doing the things that he would normally do to fill the day on like his days off. So he kind of just filled his days with new routines that weren't really the greatest, a lot of repetitive behavior, a lot of switching. Like it's weird. He went to formal names. I don't know if this is very common with a lot of autistic children, but Philip's always kind of had a repetitive behavior in his life where like when he was younger, he gave us all animal names, and it seemed very fun and jovial when he did it. But then it was very rigid where you weren't actually allowed to use your names. You could only refer to people in animal names. And so if you can imagine how crazy it is from the outside looking in, like my animal name is a horse and Philip is a chicken and my sister is the pig. And so when we were talking about stuff like, oh, like Maryssa, can you hand me the salt and pepper? He would be like, pig, hand me the salt and pepper. And like very insistent that we did that. So these are kind of his things that come up. And I feel like, I don't know why. Anyway, I could go into my theories as why, but that's not my profession. So I'll leave that to the professionals as to why. But it is something that he kind of picks up on. So during COVID, his very strict, repetitive thing that came out of it was to use formal names. So even if you had a nickname that you went by, for example, like my sister's boyfriend, his name is Doug. He insisted that everyone be called Douglas or call him Douglas, etc. So that's something that's been interesting in COVID. And I don't know if it's Philip's way of having a little bit of control on the situation. That isn't a completely inappropriate thing that he would get in trouble for, or we could like revert back to, because it's always something that like seems like for the first 2 weeks kind of funny. And then we're like, oh, wait, this is still going on. And now it's been months of this where we can't call anyone by their preferred name if their preferred name is not their full name. So that is interesting. He also became incredibly reliant on electronics and the internet. And I think he was using that to fill his time because he wasn't able to like create structure for his day. And we weren't really doing a good job with that because he hasn't been on like an hourly schedule since he was little, like in like the 10 to 14 year and younger than that, like younger than 10. Anyway, regardless of all that, we took a trip to a remote house in North Carolina, and there was very poor internet quality. So he was unable to use the internet, and we had like a major outburst for basically 3 days. What I think I haven't mentioned is that my sister works at Philip's school. So she is a trained BCBA or certified BCBA, and has done her schooling for special education with a specific master's in autism, and now is certified BCBA. So thankfully she was with us on our remote trip to the mountains and was able to kind of help reel in his behaviors and create a schedule. And I think the schedule has actually been a biggest saving grace because we were able to pretty much do the things he wants to do and create new things to do. So his day hasn't really changed, but at least it's broken out and the electronics are broken up. So he
Yeah.
can't do them for a 4-hour period. There is a 15-minute period where he has to go check in with mom and see if there's a chore. And if there is no chore, then he can go back to electronics. But at least there's this mental like cutoff and transitioning to something different, interacting with someone, being appropriate. And I think depending upon how appropriate, not I think I know, depending upon how appropriate it is the level of chores.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll do things where even if the laundry doesn't need to be cleaned, he still has to carry the laundry basket up and down like 4 times a day, just so it's something he has to do that breaks him out of his own mindset. So it's interesting. My sister kind of said he's so used to a schedule, even though I just said he hasn't been on a schedule, but he's so used to a routine, but at least he's the kind of kid that his routine can change.
Mm-hmm.
Where some of his friends from school have not been able to as easily move to like a COVID routine because they're still so stuck on the fact that they're not doing their school routine or their normal life routine. But thankfully we've gotten Philip onto like a COVID routine that seems to be working really well. Except for, well, I wouldn't say except for, but to touch on, I'm almost done, I promise.
No,
I'm just trying to remember all your points.
Yeah. I asked a lot of like multi-step questions too.
So it's good. So you were asking me about like my role. So I was very much hands off, and my sister was very, very involved and kind of around the family because she lived in the area, and I would kind of just pop in on a weekend and kind of be traveling for work a fair amount. But since I was home, it was interesting to me that I kind of stepped into the authoritative disciplinarian management of Philip's schedule during COVID. So I was the one that was making sure the schedule was done, and I was the one that was checking in with him. So that's something that's interesting from a sibling perspective, because it's not really my role, but I found myself in that role. So, but now I'm not there. I guess everyone can also know that I've now relocated again for a long period of time in COVID. So now it's just my parents and my brother back at home. So that I think has actually been really good for all of us, because it's taken me out of the equation and it's made them kind of be a unit again with the schedule. I'm not there to do it. I'm not there to reinforce or do the reward system or check in with him, etc. So it's kind of, in order for this to work and be successful, my parents are having to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That sounds like, just kind of going back to what you shared about North Carolina, that sounds like a really stressful few days that you guys had there. So it is good that your sister was around to help.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just imagine it sounds like a lot of different transitions for Philip, with people coming home and people leaving and then, going on vacation. I know this is stretched out among like 6 months or something. So it's not super, all the time, but even just with the shutdowns in New Jersey, and then not being able to go out and do things out at Costco or in the community. That's like a whole lot of stuff to handle and deal with. So how is, it sounded like, now that you've transitioned out again, that things are back good at home. What do you think Philip would say about how things are now that Christina, sister, is not home?
In Philip's terms, he would say, say what?
Yeah. Like, what would Philip say, do you think, now that you're gone?
He would say home is good. That's a really interesting question. And the interesting thing now that I'm thinking about it is Philip is 90% of the time such a like happy, easy breezy guy that when he does get anxious and he does like get upset, he very quickly goes from like 0 to 60 and you're just like, whoa, like where did this come from? But I don't know if he necessarily realizes it. So I don't know if if in, I'm trying to think, like the couple days after he kind of had his big bursts in North Carolina, I mean, it would be a lot of like reinforcement of like, am I being good? Am I being good? Am I being friendly? Did I earn whatever the reward was for the next day?
Yeah.
Um, so I guess he kind of knew that I needed to check in and do that, because on a normal day, he wouldn't need that verbal reassurance as much.
Yeah.
He would just say it once, like before he's going to bed, he'll be like, I was good, so I earned typing, or I was good, so we get donuts tomorrow, or whatever. Um, and then we would be like, yeah, that's right, bud. That sounds great. But there was a lot more. So I think also because my leaving, it's interesting. I actually hadn't really thought about it, because it was funny, because we kind of have to phase him into my transitions in and out of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the
Because you've
sense
been
of like
thinking
when I
about
was,
it for a while, right? I mean, like you guys have been
yes,
talking about it as a family, so that probably
yes,
helped a little bit.
it is. And the first couple times we started talking about it, for like me moving to Charleston, Philip was like very much like, no, you're not moving. You're staying here at 31 forever, which is our address. But now he's like open to it. So it may just be that it took a little bit of time.
Hmm.
But it is interesting, because there are things that we can't talk about immediately, because he'll like be very adamant that it's not happening. So you kind of have to wait until either he understands it, or actually we kind of have to wait until it's happening. Like that was the same thing when I was moving home, because it was always the plan around April for me to move back home temporarily to New Jersey. But if we had talked about it before, Philip was very adamant. So digging into it, it is, he doesn't really like change. I think he doesn't like change because he can't control it, and he doesn't, and maybe it's because he's so happy with where he is
Hmm.
that changes to people around him are maybe unsettling for him, that he thinks that then he's going to change.
Hmm.
So I pretty much, we just like didn't really tell him I wasn't going back to New York until like a week in. And he was like, when are you going back to New York? And we were like,
I'm
I'm
not.
not going to go back. And he was like, okay, that sounds good. So,
Yeah.
and then that was the end of that conversation. So
Okay.
I don't know
Yeah,
if
he'll
that
have
really
a
answers
cool place to
it.
go visit, so it'll be good.
Yeah,
Once things, people can travel safely.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I guess kind of like nearing the end, sort of as a sibling, as a family member, like what do you want people to know when they work with families? It's not just like the child, it's like the whole family unit. And so you guys, I know, have a really strong family, unit, and it might be complex in some ways, but what do you want like people going into the field or just in general? What do you want people to know?
I think the biggest takeaway, and this is something my mom has kind of always said, is when Philip first got into PCDI and they were accepted as a family. Um, the the director of the school told my parents that they needed to look into after daycare for my sister and I. They needed to get a nanny. They needed to get someone to focus on us, because it was going to take all of her attention to focus on Philip. And my mom pretty much said, absolutely not. That's not the way this is going to operate. She said, because in 20 years, Philip's not going to turn around and say, thanks, mom, for sitting at the kitchen island with us, or sitting at the kitchen island with me and, working on me. Maybe one day he'll turn around and say, thanks, mom, I love you. And that will be, a huge success, because at that point he wasn't really speaking too much.
Yeah.
She goes, but my girls will look back in 20 years and be like, why were you never around? Why were we always with someone different? So I guess what I say to that is, when going into the field, every child with a disability is different. Every child with autism is different. I mean, even my brother and his two friends, they joined the program at the same time. They've had the same teachers. All three of them are incredibly different, and their schedules, their needs, the way they operate is different. But also to kind of take into account the entire family, because if we had kind of segregated the family, and like all the focus all the time was on Philip, or my sister and I were kind of pushed, not necessarily pushed to the side, but we were focused on our own thing.
Hmm.
I don't know. Well, I know we definitely would not be in the situation we are today. I do think that we are as close knit of a family. And I do think a lot of it is Philip's done so well because we've been like one unit together. And we haven't hid him. We didn't send him away. The people that are in our lives have known Philip ever since they knew us. It's something that you meet me and you know about Philip almost instantaneously. People joke that at college, it took them a while to realize that I actually had a sister because all I did was talk about Philip, and my parents, and Philip and my parents. And then I think one day I like casually mentioned my sister and they were like, what? There's more than just the two of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just think the family unit is incredibly important because that individual or the sibling that the child with autism, I think, is also so important to the family members and who they are. There's no like one way without the other.
Yeah. I really like that example that you gave, or your mom gave, I guess, about the kitchen island kind of thing that
Mhm.
you guys, just with kids with disabilities and, abilities, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so I think seeing everyone as a family unit and being able to reflect back later on is really important. So
Yeah,
great.
definitely.
Cool.
So,
Well, is there anything else you want to share with the group?
I think that hit on probably most everything that's not going to tailspin into something completely irrelevant or
Yeah.
45 minutes later.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if anyone has specific questions or, wants more information or conversation,
Okay.
I'm available. But
Sounds good.
hopefully that was a pretty good, I mean, I guess maybe the last thing we'll say, do you want to talk a little bit about like future responsibilities?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you still have some time. Yeah, why don't we kind of to preface to the class, we talked a little bit about sort of planning for the future and what happens when siblings maybe transition to a different role or parents are no longer with us. So yeah, what does that sort of look like, especially with like your move and, you
Right,
know, read
right.
everything. Yeah.
And I think that's something that's so unique to siblings
Hmm.
because with parents, with adults, they generally are making the conscious choice to have a child. And
Yep.
so they know the risks and responsibilities that come on with that. As a sibling, that's not necessarily something that like I would opt into. Not that I would ever opt out of the situation I am with Philip, but I think it's something that's so drastically different than any other person that works with this community
Hmm.
because you and just because of nature, you're going to be around longer than the parents. So that was always kind of an awareness in the back of my mind that Philip will be my responsibility down the line.
Hmm.
My sister and I have a really great relationship, and we have very different strengths. So I think it's also incredibly helpful that there's two of us because
Hmm.
it's not just the burden. I hate the word burden, but I think burden makes the most sense. A responsibility isn't just on me. We can share it. I do think my parents, because my mom is also a sibling and has kind of always had that awareness. And when my dad married into the family, um, he kind of took on those responsibilities, and he actually has been on the board of the program that my uncle goes to. So my dad's actually taken on responsibilities and has like some decision making for my uncle. So with that being said, I feel like my parents are also in a unique situation where they've lived the sibling experience. So they, I think, have done a really great job of trying to set my sister and I up to have the resources and the ability and like get Philip situated into the best place for him. So that way we can be supportive and aware and responsible, but it's not going to be a 24/7 commitment.
Hmm.
Um, I, my understanding, and I my sister would be, and anyone, a lot of other people would be better to speak on this, but I think in New Jersey, New Jersey has really great care for adults.
Yeah.
And because we've been in New Jersey and Philip's had his intervention, he's been with PCDI. Because, and I guess to transition that for a minute, a lot of people say, why are you still like in New Jersey, like with where my parents are still living? Why are you still in the house? Why are you there? Like, because a lot of our friends and family will like move across the border to Pennsylvania where things are a little bit cheaper, or down to Delaware where like taxes are, et cetera. But
Yeah.
my parents are very adamant that we need to stay in New Jersey as our primary residence in order to continue the services and keep Philip in the best spot to be
Yeah.
taken care of when the time comes that he gets into a group home, or, you know, in the unfortunate situation, something happens to my parents before he gets into the group home, for New Jersey and the school to kind of be able to step in and take care. So that gives me a little bit of reassurance. But it definitely has been something that's weighed upon me, because I've now moved and I'm in the process of moving down to South Carolina from New Jersey, which is a bit of a ways. So that has been like a family conversation
Hmm.
of, and a personal struggle of, can I be that far away type of a thing. And, you know, conversations of, well, right now my parents are, knock wood, still in very good health, and my sister's there, so I don't have to be there now. And it's kind of this constant conversation of, I'm not needed now, but I will be needed in the future. So try and make decisions, I guess, with that in mind.
Yeah. So sort of
But
like,
I,
not, yeah, not knowing what it will look like potentially in the future. Um,
exactly.
yeah. I didn't mean to.
But it is definitely a constant conversation. It's a conversation I know my sister has had with her boyfriend, because it is something that anyone that you get into a relationship with long term, um, you know, it's something that they also are going to be a part of.
Hmm.
So it's a it's a big topic, but it is something I think that's very specific to siblings.
Yeah.
So on our sibling talk, I guess that's what
Yes.
I'll end
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. As you think about, 'cause, yeah, you don't really buy into, having siblings. You kind of, you're born into it. And so you're kind
Mhm.
of stuck with your family. So in good and bad.
Yeah.
So that's really good to know. But um, great. Well, I think that kind of covers it. So thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, working
Absolutely.
from home to connect and chat about this. So thanks so much,
Ah,
Christina.
absolutely. My pleasure.